I was recently contacted to make a piece of cat furniture. It was a crescent moon-shaped shelf that matched this photo. Apparently the original maker doesn't produce them anymore, so I said why not. I started by figuring out the arc radius on paper. Once I had that, I made a simple circle cutting jig for my router. To lay out the outside of the crescent, I used a 1/4-inch straight cutting bit. To make the template, I used some spare 1/2-inch thick plywood. For these cuts, I only went about halfway through. After the outline for the crescent was done, I needed to make a 3/4-inch wide groove. As it turned out, the only 3/4-inch wide bit I had was super janky. After a light plunge to mark the spot, I had to use a Forstner bit to be able to make a hole so I could start the cut. This groove will be used to lay out the mortises that the connecting piece that holds the two halves of the crescent moon together will go. I used the router base itself as a reference for where to start and stop this groove. Next, I carefully cut out the crescent moon on the bandsaw. At this point, I'm just carefully removing the waste in the routed areas. I don't want to cut into any of the full thickness of the plywood. I finished the template off on the router table. I used a flush cut bit and the previously routed out grooves as a guide. I also didn't want the ends of the moon to be too pointy, so I softened them up with the belt sander. To match the original piece, I used true 1/2-inch thick Baltic birch plywood. This stuff is really nice to work with. It's dead flat, void free, and has thick exterior veneers. I did lose a bandsaw blade while rough cutting these pieces out. But luckily I did have a spare on hand. So here's a little demonstration of how this groove works. I'm using a 3/4-inch guide bushing installed on the base plate of the router. In the router I'll have a 1/2-inch thick bit. This will make the perfect mortise. I used some carpet tape to affix the template to my crescent moon side. I wouldn't actually recommend using this kind of tape. It is kind of cheap, and when you try to remove it, a lot of the residue stays on and takes forever to get off. But it does work. I cut the mortises first with what turned out to be an incredibly dull bit. I only went a 1/4 inch deep, but I probably should have done it in 2 passes. Once the mortise was done, I cleaned up the outside. When I cut the second moon shape out, I used the other side of the template to make sure I ended up with 2 mirror images. The moon is going to be backlit, so I need to have a smaller kind of moon-shaped piece to go behind it. The narrow edge of this part is what the LED strips are going to be attached to. I didn't want the moon to sit a full 1/2 inch proud of the wall. So to close that gap, I made a bit of a recess for this part to go into. You can't see it here, but this router does have an upper guide bushing that I'm using to make this groove. After I made that first groove, I used it as an outline to ensure that I could cleanly route away the rest of the inside of that recess. I know this is going to be on the back side of something that's screwed to a wall, but I still wanted it to be neat. So here you can see that when it's all done, it'll stand off the wall about 1/4 of an inch. For the centerpiece, I needed to make some bendy plywood. With the blade raised about 3/8 of an inch high, I started cutting grooves. I use the masking tape as a visual reference just to make sure they're as evenly spaced as I can get them. They don't need to be perfect though. True Baltic birch plywood is great for this kind of thing because the outside veneers are so thick. Kerf bending cheaper plywood can result in kind of a creased appearance on the outside of the curve. I used some of the scraps to make trim pieces to go on the ends of that kerf bent part. I also threw a slight round over on the edge of the moon pieces. As one last step before gluing this whole thing together, I had to cut out a hole for this tiny housing to be installed. I designed and 3D printed this part, and it's going to eventually hold a battery pack and a switch. I also 3D printed a template for the hole, and for some reason I made it about 3 times thicker than I needed to. On the inside, I routed out a space for the flange to be glued to. This way it'll sit flat underneath the carpet. It would have been easy to forget to do this, but I also routed out a slot for the wiring to go through. With all the provisions for the lighting done, I then glued the 2 pieces that make up the wall side of the moon together. Once that glue dried, I added some countersunk screw holes so it could be mounted to a wall. I sanded everything before final glue up. I did this in 2 stages, always keeping the glue on the bottom side so nothing would drip down as it dried. To finish, I used 3 coats of water-based polyurethane. I used the same type of switch that I used in the record shelf build. The link to that video is in the upper right. All the connections were soldered with heat shrink applied. To mount the switch, I also 3D printed a little bracket. This was glued to the switch, which was then in turn glued into the housing. Next, I glued in the 12-volt battery holder. I've never been overly impressed with the adhesive that's on the back of LED strip lights. In most applications, I can use little brackets to screw on and make sure that the strips don't fall off. However, due to these clearance issues, I didn't have room for that type of thing. So I had decided to add a layer of 3M double-sided tape. I've had pretty good success having this stuff stick to just about anything. If you want more in-depth info about LED strip lights, my illuminated custom closet build video is in the upper right-hand corner. Once all the connections were complete, I put in a battery and tried it out. I used some hot glue to secure the switch housing and the wires. I lined the inside of the crescent moon with some self-adhesive carpet tiles. After cutting 3 of them to width, I had to modify one of those to leave a little flap to get to my battery compartment. For this one, I removed some of the paper backing and replaced it with some blocking material that I had so it wouldn't stick to the moon. I wanted to make sure that the carpet tiles would really stick good to this so the cat wouldn't be able to scratch any of the carpet off. So I added a layer of contact cement to the back of the kerf bent piece. I did some tests and this greatly improved the adhesion of the carpet tiles. And here you can see how the battery compartment is accessed. I shipped the shelf to the client who sent me this video and these pictures. As you can see, the kitty likes his new lookout. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you made it this far, thanks for watching.